Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always. What have you got for us today?
Well, today we're going to be tackling Indian divorce law.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but not just, the basics. We're going deep with a Supreme Court case. Shamima Farooqui versus Shahid Khan from 2015.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
You'll see why. This one, it's not just about the legal back and forth. It gets into some pretty big ideas. Fairness, changing gender roles in India.
I see.
Even what it means to, and the court uses this phrase, live with dignity.
Powerful stuff. And what are we working with, source-wise, for this deep dive?
We've got excerpts straight from the Supreme Court judgment itself.
So we get to see their reasoning firsthand.
Exactly. No filter.
I always find that fascinating. The language they use, how they frame the issues. Should be a good one.
Oh, it is. And one thing that jumps out right away is how the judgment starts. It's like, boom, right into these really strong statements about how gender roles, expectations, all of that, it's changing in India.
So they're setting the scene then, not just diving into the specifics of the case.
Right. They're painting this picture of modern India, how women are standing up for their rights, pushing back against traditions that might be holding them back.
That's really interesting. Do they use any specific language that highlights that kind of shift?
Oh, absolutely. There's this one line. They say, hold on, let me get it right. Okay. When centuries-old obstructions are removed, the women of today can gracefully and boldly assert their legal rights and refuse to be tied down to obscurant conservatism.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty powerful stuff.
And they don't stop there. They even use this phrase talking about ostracizing the principle of commodity when it comes to women.
Strong words, especially coming from the highest court in the land.
It really sets the tone for the whole case. And this idea that it's not just about this one couple, Shamima and Shahid, it's about something bigger. This shift in how women are seen, treated, under the law.
Yeah, I'm starting to see what you mean about this case being more than just a divorce dispute.
Exactly. And that becomes even more clear when you get into the story itself. So, okay, imagine this. Shamima, she files for maintenance from her ex-husband, Shahid, kind of like alimony.
Okay.
And she claims, right, that he mistreated her and demanded dowry, which sadly is still a huge problem in India.
It is a deeply rooted social issue with, unfortunately, continued legal ramifications.
Right. Adds another layer to this whole thing. But it gets even more complicated because Shahid, he has his own side of the story.
Yeah, actually.
He claims he already divorced her, according to Islamic law, and that he paid the mahr, that's the dower, required under Islamic law. So basically he's saying, case closed.
So we have conflicting accounts, different legal traditions coming into play. It must have been quite a challenge for the court to sort all that out.
You're telling me, and this is where Section 125 of the Indian Criminal Procedure Code gets involved. This is key. The court spends a lot of time in the judgment making sure everyone understands that this section, it applies to Muslim women too, even after divorce.
So they're emphasizing that certain legal protections are universal, regardless of someone's religion.
Exactly. There are some basic rights that everyone is entitled to, no matter what. But here's the thing, and this is what really got me, is how long this whole process took. I mean, we're talking about a case filed in 1998, decided in 2012.
14 years, that's incredible.
Right. A lifetime, practically. And the court was not happy about it, not one bit.
I can imagine. Such a long delay in a family matter like this, it's got to take a toll.
They called it, and I quote, a distressing phenomenon. Said these delays in family courts, they corrode human relationships, have this ripple effect out into society.
Wow. So they're connecting this specific case to a much bigger issue. This idea that justice delayed is justice denied.
Right. And it's not just abstract. This delay, it had a real impact on Shamima's life, on her ability to move on, to rebuild. And that leads into this really interesting part of the judgment where they talk about the whole purpose of alimony, or in this case, maintenance, and this idea of living with dignity.
Okay, now I'm really interested. Dignity. Not a word you typically hear in a legal context, especially when it comes to financial matters.
Right. But they make it central. They're saying, and this is a direct quote, a woman who is constrained to leave the marital home should not be allowed to feel that she has fallen from grace and move hither and thither arranging for sustenance.
So they're saying it's not just about basic survival. It's about maintaining a certain quality of life, a sense of self-respect.
Exactly. And that raises all sorts of questions about how we think about alimony, especially as gender roles are changing. But we'll get into that in a bit.
I'm ready when you are. This is getting good. It really makes you think, doesn't it? This idea that alimony, it's not just about keeping someone afloat financially. It's about something more.
Right. It's like they're saying a woman shouldn't be punished for leaving a bad marriage, shouldn't have to compromise her dignity.
And the court, they really hammer home Shahid's obligation to support Shamima, like, regardless of his situation.
Yeah, they didn't mince words on that. Whether he's retired or not, whether he says he has no income, he's still got to support his ex-wife.
That's pretty strong. I mean, there are always two sides to every story, right?
Of course. But they were making a point. They even referenced another case, Chandra Prakash Budraj versus Shilarani Chandra Prakash.
Okay, and what happened in that one?
Basically, the court said, look, if a man's able-bodied, we assume he can find a way to earn a living and support his family.
So they're setting a high bar for what counts as a valid excuse.
Definitely. They weren't messing around. But, it does make you think about all the nuances, right?
Absolutely. Like, what about situations where a husband genuinely can't work? Disability, illness, things like that.
It's tricky. There's got to be a balance.
Right. You don't want to create a situation where someone's unfairly burdened, but you also want to make sure there are protections in place for those who need them.
And let's not forget, Shahid did have his own perspective.
Right. He claimed he'd already met his obligations under Islamic law.
Exactly. Which just shows how complicated these cases can get when you've got religious practices, personal beliefs, all tangled up with civil law.
It's like layers upon layers. And in this case, the court seemed to prioritize that Section 125 over Shahid's argument about Islamic law.
It's like they were saying, okay, sure, you may have followed your religious obligations, but there are also these overarching legal protections in place, and those apply to everyone.
Interesting. It makes you wonder how often that kind of conflict comes up.
I'm sure it's more common than we realize. But okay, back to the Farooqui case. Because remember how the lower courts had reduced Shamima's alimony? The Supreme Court, they weren't having it. They reversed that reduction, called it unreasonable.
So they thought Shamima deserved more support than the lower courts had granted her.
Right. They considered Shahid's income, even though he was retired, and they emphasized Shamima's need to be able to live independently.
So they were factoring in her ability to maintain her own household, her own life.
Exactly. And it wasn't just about the bare minimum. They wanted to make sure she wouldn't be struggling, that she wouldn't have to drastically lower her standard of living because of the divorce.
I see. And Shahid's attempts to downplay his finances, those didn't fly with the Supreme Court either.
Not at all. They even pointed out that he had access to other assets. So, yeah, they were pretty thorough in their assessment.
It's interesting how much emphasis they put on the financial side of things. Like they really wanted to make sure Shamima would be okay.
I think it goes back to that whole idea of dignity, making sure she wasn't left in a vulnerable position, that she could move forward with her life.
Makes sense. It's not just about the money itself. It's about what the money represents.
Right. Freedom, security, independence, all those things.
It really highlights the complexity of these kinds of cases, how much goes into determining what's fair and just.
Absolutely. And the court's critique of the delays, that was powerful too. They weren't just pointing fingers, they were connecting it to this bigger issue of access to justice.
Yeah, delays like that, they can be devastating. Financially, emotionally, for everyone involved.
Right. 14 years. It's hard to even fathom. Makes you wonder how many other cases are out there stuck in limbo.
And how many lives are on hold because of it.
Exactly. So, yeah, this case, it's a lot more than just a divorce dispute.
It really is. And it brings up a lot of interesting questions, too.
Like, what does this idea of living with dignity really mean?
Yeah, how do you define that? How do you measure it?
And does it only apply to women? What about men who might be in a similar situation?
Lots to unpack there.
Definitely. But before we get too deep into that, I want to come back to something specific to the Farooqui case. Remember how the Supreme Court, they kept saying living with dignity, right? But what does that even mean, like, practically speaking?
Yeah, good point. It's a nice idea. But how do you actually measure that? What makes a life dignified after a divorce?
Right. I mean, it's got to be more than just, like, having a place to live and food to eat.
I think so. It's probably about being able to maintain a decent standard of living, having access to healthcare, education, not constantly worrying about money.
Yeah. Being able to participate in your community, not feeling like you've been sidelined because of the divorce.
Exactly. And having the means to pursue your own goals, to contribute to society. It's about more than just getting by. It's about having the opportunity to thrive.
So it's like the court's saying society has a stake in this. It's better for everyone if people aren't left behind after a divorce.
I think that's a really good way to put it. It's an investment not just in individuals, but in the community as a whole.
This case has really made me think differently about divorce law and just all the social stuff that goes along with it.
Me too. It shows how much things are changing and how the law has to keep evolving to keep up.
Right. Like our ideas about gender roles, financial independence, what it means to have a dignified life. It's all shifting.
And cases like Shamima Farooqui versus Shahid Khan, they push those conversations forward.
They do. So, okay, here's something to think about. We've talked a lot about this idea that alimony should be about more than just survival. But do you think our current laws actually do that? Like, do they really ensure that people can live with dignity after a divorce?
That's a big question. One worth thinking about, for sure.
It is, and it makes you wonder, what else can we do? How can we build a system that really supports people going through something as tough as a divorce?
Lots to consider there. I don't know if they're easy answers.
Probably not, but it's a conversation worth having.
Absolutely. It affects so many people.
Well, on that note, I think we've done our deep dive for today.
We covered a lot of ground.
We did, and hopefully got folks thinking about some of these bigger issues. So until next time, keep those brains buzzing.